What's going on, guys? And welcome to episode 24. I am your host, Marcus. And in this episode, we are talking about the greatest gift you can't get back. Now, this is something that I had come across and doing some research about different things. I've talked about a lot of different topics. And so right now I'm looking for something specific that I think I've touched on, but we don't really grasp what it means with our time. Yes, I've talked about time before in a fashion essentially that, time is a very limited thing. But in this episode, I wanted to really dive deep about time because I know when my father passed, I really looked at time, and for whatever reason, it really intrigued me. I think because of that, during that same time, I actually read one of Albert Einstein's books. I think it was called Albert Einstein's Dreams, which is something I believe I actually did a book review on. And I also read another particular book that was quite intriguing about life after death. Yes, now I did read some really interesting books around that time, but I know even the Life After Death book was by, I believe he was a professor, essentially that is essentially studied his whole life about time, and he has some really interesting theories essentially about the atom and how it doesn't exist, and that it only exists because we focus on the atom. And so it brought a lot of different concepts and ideas to my mind. And then reading the book about Albert Einstein, that book talks about essentially different worlds, right? And how they essentially perceive time. And it's actually a really interesting book about people that know they're going to die, that essentially live life knowing they're going to die. And then it dives into a bunch of other different types of environments as well. I can't recall all of the environments essentially because of the fact that it's been a while since I've read it. I think it's been, that was the last time I actually did read that book. But I do recall it being very good in the concepts about how time is perceived. And, when talking about the greatest gift of time, and I always talk about this, and I keep this idea keeps reoccurring in my mind about, life is so short, and maybe sometimes, you get to a point to where you're like, what, I'm tired, right? You may be struggling through life and you just say, I'm tired and I really don't want to make changes in my life, and not really understand the grasp and the understanding of life and what it means, right? I know life can be really hard. And so when you look at time is something like, well, it's just a more prolonged sentence into this life that I'm not enjoying. And if you look at it that way, if you look at life in that perspective, you're really understanding that life, there's more to life. And I think what the issue is here, and I think what a lot of people that I'm starting to see, especially with what has happened with the pandemic and everything, people are starting to understand this a little bit more. But the fact that, we've been fed into a system that makes you just work for a large majority of your life. Stash away money, and maybe one day you can retire, and hopefully by that time, you can be able to enjoy yourself. You'll be able to still be mobile. You'll still be able to have a good mindset, right? And so being said, this whole concept of time and understanding what you can make of your life. Because when you look at time and you look at your life, and if your life isn't good, you don't want it to be prolonged, right? It's like any bad moments in your life, you don't want it to be prolonged. And that's why I talk about making changes, taking action, and doing these things. And I may seem really redundant, but it is important. And I change perspective and talk about different things to help you essentially make that change. Because it's for me, that's what it took. It took a willingness for me and somebody else's perspective that allowed me to make a change for the better. Again, I've always talked about, I've always made big changes, but to make a bigger change and to realize I could change more about me than I actually could actually realize, which I think was the most intriguing thing. So when you talk about time and thinking that, that it's just like a sentence, you should really think about, well, what can I do in that time? What can I do in this window to make it exciting. I think you really have to look at time and your life in the same fashion. And when you start looking at your life and about really how are you going to make a life that you would enjoy? And you may not have things in your life. A lot of different things in your life may not be working out to be the best. But you have to take steps to get yourself there. You have to remove yourself from environments, remove relationships. Understand, when you talk about relationships, understand that, any kind of relationship, right? Professional or personal, you should understand that your time is the most valuable asset that you have. You don't have an abundance of it, although we like to go about using it like we have an abundance of it. And one good thing I want to throw in here that actually comes to mind, and it was a really interesting concept. I don't remember where I heard this from, but when talking about the abundance of time, I had heard this concept about after you graduate, right? Like you grow up with your parents, and by the time you're out of the house, you're so happy to be out of the house and not be able to see them again. But then it comes down to this: once you're an actual adult, you really only have a handful of times that you will see your parents. On average, I know for myself, it's only been a handful of times since I've seen my parents since I've been an adult. I've traveled the world, and so being said, I didn't see him as much as I wanted to. Like I didn't see my dad as much as I wanted to. I talked about it many times, but I didn't visit him as often. It'd be a couple of years before I saw him. It wasn't until closer to the end of his life that I was visiting him. I think it was 2 or 3 times a year at that point. But being said, that is something to keep in mind, right? You become an adult, you only see your parents a handful of times. You only see so many people in your life a handful of times. And the reason to understand is also that there's very select few in your life that will get the bulk of your time. Now, if you have kids, right, of course your kids are going to take a large majority of that for a certain amount of years, right, until they're adults, and then they go through this whole cycle again. But understanding that and understand that concept that you only see, and then at that point, right, you only see your kids a handful of times. And so it's important to know where your time is going. Am I saying you need to go out and make sure that you're constantly doing something that is productive all the time? I'm not saying that at all. Even myself, I've had to check myself on a lot of different things for working too hard. But I do enjoy stuff like this, right? I do enjoy doing podcasts. I do enjoy doing stock market stuff, right? I could spend hours upon hours doing stock market stuff, which may not sound exciting to a lot of people, but I enjoy it. Where my time is spent is with people that I like being around, right? And people that aren't judging of me, people that aren't judging of others, right? A specific type of people that will help me grow and prosper in my life. And that is what matters, is where your time is going, and realizing that it's a gift. And when someone actually gives you that gift, right, is to be respectful of that gift, cherish that gift. And I think it's hard, and sometimes you have to remind yourself of this. Even myself, I have to remind myself of this many different times, because you have to understand that it's something that you have to keep repeating in your mind, or else you tend to forget it. And this is why I talk about auditing yourself all the time, because a lot of concepts and stuff that you try to apply to your life, it has to be ingrained. You have to make it a routine so it fires naturally, right? And then when it starts firing naturally, right, it's not so difficult. And then you pinpoint it before you even start thinking about it a lot of different times. This is why routine is such a big thing. When you're talking about time and talking about where that time is going, right? Like the people that are close to you, that time is time you will never get back. Those people, and depending on the duration of the time, right, they'll have an impact over your life. If it's over a couple minutes, a couple hours, it's not going to make that big of an impact. But when it's over a couple of days, weeks, months, years, right, decades, that impact of where that time is spent matters, right? Those relationships you make, right? You want those to be good relationships. You want to nature and nurture those relationships, the good ones. Sometimes good ones turn into bad ones, right? Sometimes bad ones can turn into good ones. The rarity of that is very difficult, but you have to understand that you really need to make the experience and where your time is going, relationships, whatever you're doing, right? Whatever your career choice is, whatever if you're being an entrepreneur or if you're going to change careers, right? Like I changed careers many different times in my life and realized that, you outgrow things. Realize that that's okay. Realize that what matters is where your time is going and that you're happy in the moment. It's not saying you're going to be forever happy. That's just not going to happen, right? But have an environment and people and the things that you do in your life that they matter, because that's what matters is the time that you have. And going back to the books and stuff, it was actually really interesting, especially that one, the Life After Death. It was interesting because the title didn't quite match what the book was about. The book really talked, and I have a book review on this, but I can't recall the name of this particular book. But if you are interested in this, just hit me up at this Marcus at discoverignite.com, and I can get you that book. But nonetheless, or you can go ahead on YouTube on Discover Ignite and look for it there. But that particular book, it talked again about the elements. It started out with the elements of an atom, and that the atom really does not exist. Now, what does that mean, right? That means that everything is made of atoms. We don't exist until we focus, and then it goes into time. It talks about time, and that the only reason this particular moment exists now is because you are focusing on this moment. And yes, it's like the whole plugged into the matrix thing. It can get kind of hairy and everything like that, right? Because we want facts. We want to be able to prove things. And science, with greater technologies and stuff, is improving this and understanding that there is a lot more out there. And a lot of times when you're going through the daily mundane things, you really don't think about these things. And this is where it comes into like law of attraction and all that stuff. And people talk about it's not possible. You can't essentially forge something out of nothing when you look at it in that concept that an atom doesn't even exist unless you concentrate on it. And if you sit every day and you focus on that thing that you want, you can manifest these things into your life. Yes, it does require, you need to be taking action, and everything needs to align to that thing. That's what essentially a lot of attraction is that all your actions and everything have to be aligned with what you're thinking. And when you're sitting and you're pondering this idea or this vision that you have. And so it gets really intriguing at that point. And again, it talks about how, the different points in time, right? Like there's a particular snake, I don't know what it's called or where it's from, but there's a particular snake. If you've ever seen a snake that essentially is engulfing itself, right? It's eating the back end of itself and going in circles, and that essentially you are in a specific chunk of time. That time is infinite, right? Time is actually man-made, but ultimately understand that this particular moment is because you are focusing on it. So that opens up to a lot of different concepts and theories. But again, this particular professor has been doing this for years and has some really interesting science that backs all this stuff. And so when you look at that and just time in itself, right, and then looking at your relationships, looking at the way your life is going, right, let's not think about life is an expiration date. I just got to get to my expiration date because I just can't stand life. It's not the way life should be lived. And think that you'll have to make some difficult choices. You'll have to make some difficult changes in life. And I've always talked about how change is painful. It's not easy, but change is necessary. It is always necessary. Again, either you will make the change that you want or life will give you change that you don't want. And I've always talked about this in realizing that sometimes I'm more motivated than others to do things, to make more dramatic changes. And sometimes, yes, I do procrastinate about stuff, about specific changes in my life because of things like uncertainty, but I'm becoming more comfortable with those things. I'm comfortable with myself, comfortable knowing that I will leave this life essentially knowing that I have aligned myself with the things that I enjoyed. I was trying to make the most of my human experience, right? Something we talk about all the time. Now, yes, you do have to have things that can help guide you and things that can help get you there. You can't just willy-nilly just do whatever you want. If you don't have responsibilities, right, and you're young, you do have a lot more flexibility, right? Because you can go off and do things that you typically haven't. And one of the greatest things I've done was travel the world at a young age, and something that I want to continue to do, right? Eventually, when I start getting to the point to where, my kids are out of school and everything, that's what I want to do. I want to travel the world. I want to experience everything that there is to experience, go everywhere and just, backpack it, or just rent a car and drive across the states, right? That's what matters. The experiences are what matter. Having the big house, the car, and all these things, these are things that they just give temporary satisfaction, but yet we are all focused on these things. And when we see someone that is focused on something else, we think that there's something off about them, right? Because we've all been ingrained that we have to be consumers as opposed to being creators, right? And understand that we are creating our life. And when you go back to the idea of, well, I'm just waiting for my expiration date. Well, if you're waiting for expiration date, why don't you make it worth living? Make small changes, right? And I'm talking about some bigger, grander scales, and I've made some bigger, grander changes in my life, but ultimately understand that it's a gradual thing, right? You make a change here, you make a change there, right? I talk about all the tools that build yourself out, so you can kind of have that. So you have that internal compass, and then you're focused on the present moment, so that that way you can make the change, right? That you're not stuck in the past, not stuck in the future. You're more stuck in the now and enjoying the moment, and trying to make the best of every single moment that you have. And in saying that, in looking at time, I think that, again, the greatest correction I've had in perspective and time was of my father, and seeing what he did. And I was always like him. I still always to this day, I work hard on what I do, right? Maybe I fail many different times, but I continue to work hard till I get it. And understanding that, and moving forward, and then seeing how, he worked so hard and he achieved all these things. And then he got to a point to where, none of the material stuff mattered anymore. That all it came down to was essentially the relationships and the time you spent with those people. Time you spent with those people, moments you spent with those people. And I know it's so much easier said than done, because you're not in that perspective to shake and rattle you. Because a lot of times, to make any change, which is something else another statement I've heard before, most recently, was essentially trying to understand how hard it is to change myself. It was hard to change because I knew it was a lot of incremental changes that eventually got me to where I am now, and continue to make changes, right? And continue to adjust stuff, because you can't just stop making changes, but ultimately understand that, the growth is where we're happy. And I've talked about, being in that ecosystem where you're motivated and to want to do things, because you're in constant creation of this ecosystem that allows you to be creative and motivated and do all these things, right? And in saying that, being in that space and understanding where your time is going is critical, right? There are relationships that may be taking too much of your time, that aren't serving you. There may be a job that's taking your time, taking away all your resources. And when talking about this and looking at my career and in the amount of time, right? And to think, for the longest time, like, I worked 80 hours a week for a long time when I was younger. And even as an adult, I've worked many, 60, 70 hour weeks. But being said, you think about those kind of things, And then when I started getting older, I got to the point to where it's like, no, I'll go in at this time and I leave at this time, right? Like if there's something like critical, yeah, I'll sit there and I'll fix it. But ultimately understand like, why can't it wait till tomorrow, right? Like my life matters. Like there's other things I want to do, because I don't want to live a life where all I did was work 80 hours a week. Like what significance is that? You really have to enjoy your life, and I love finding other people that have the same mentality about this, and realizing that it's more than just the money, it's more than all these little things, but live a simple life. A simple life, you find more joy in it. And sometimes you need to get to the point to where you make all this money, and then you realize that this isn't really where I'm happy. What am I really chasing here? As opposed to, well, I don't need to be chasing this, but I can live a more simpler life and be so much happier. Right? Just think about that. Just think about if you didn't have an expensive car payment, or even a car payment. Right? What if you just bought a junker for cheap, right? Then you wouldn't have a car payment. You wouldn't be fancy, that's great, but it doesn't matter. You don't have a payment. You're not locked into having to have a job to pay for that car, or having to have a big house. Right now, I think I kind of lucked out on the timing with everything, and getting in my particular house, and then realizing that, what I pay now is actually cheaper than renting. So it was timing and luck on that particular aspect for me, although I had to take the action and follow up on that. Right. And then the way everything kind of played out is calls back to intuition, and realizing that I felt like I needed to check on it. I wasn't actually going to execute, and I checked up on it. And then lo and behold, right, I found a place. It all worked out, and come to find out, right, like the pandemic happened, rates hit rock bottom. So now I'm paying, right, for this beautiful place that I have, for dirt cheap what I was paying for rent at some place that wasn't nowhere near as nice. And being said, it doesn't matter to me. I can live in some small place and it wouldn't bother me, because for me, I know, right, like I've been there, I've done that. I know where I'm most happier when I'm free. That's where I want to spend my time, not where I have to go to work, not where I have to sit in traffic. That's like one of the worst things is sitting in traffic and just watching your time dwindle away. It's frustrating, and I know it is. But you got to set yourself up for opportunities and leverage the things that you have to put you in those spots. And it's not that perhaps someone leveled up and there's just no way of you knowing. And that's why I share a lot of different things I talk about on here, because there's ways to get around things. And it's not just black and white, like you have to work a 9 to 5. There's other resources out there that will help you get you to where you want to go. It's just being knowledgeable about them and not being afraid of them, and following that intuition. And even myself, I've talked about intuition and how, a lot of times that intuition is muffled. You have to amplify that intuition by things like the breathing and the meditation, like I talk about. Like you have to amplify that intuition so when it comes up and it's telling you to do something, that's when you execute. That's the next step, is executing when it's telling you to do something. Not saying, no, just blow it off. Because intuition will only give you that step right then and there when you need it. And that can seem really scary. And even for myself, it seems scary. But the more I practice this concept and understanding, especially about time, and realizing that the more I can be in tune with this intuition, that I'm okay and I'm comfortable. And I've seen that things play out. I just have to be okay and comfortable with where it's taking me. It's when you start getting in the worrying process and allowing the left side of your brain, the whole logical side, that's like, well, this doesn't make any sense, and that's not what I learned. Again, you have to remember that you have a system that is trying to convert you into a consumer, or else the machine doesn't spin, right? That's what you have to understand. It's unplugging from that and realizing what you can actually do. right? We're moving more into a space where, people are working essentially a gig economy, right? Like they can go drive cars for some money, or they can flip stuff and make some money, or there's a bunch of different ways you can make money. And money, people can say money is the root of all evil. Money is just a tool to help provide those things that you need in life, right? We aren't living back in the early ages where we had to grow our own food. Some people still do that. I've even considered wanting to do that myself when I get hopefully to another place, because I've been thinking about moving again myself. And being said, it's just about time and what is truly important, the relationships you have, and again, being aware of those relationships, right? And not taking advantage of relationships where somebody's giving you time. Right? I think that's also equally important, is understand if there's relationships in your life that are good, right? It's like someone's giving their time and you want that time. I think it's important to address that, right? If that's the time you don't want, is to let them know. I think it's important to let people know and say, hey, I enjoy your time. I enjoy being around you, or I don't, right? And understand that I am creating this environment because I'm creating this experience for myself, and realizing that, I got so much time, and it's what you do with it. It's where you spend it. Where you spend, if you're working, where are you spending that? It's someplace you enjoy, right? Can you start your own business, right? It doesn't mean you have to completely start some big Fortune 500 company. No. Maybe you just write some books, right? And get some extra money, invest that money, and realize that investment has allowed you to give you freedom to do exactly whatever you want. But there's ways to do it, and there's no tricks or nothing. I don't try to teach you tricks or anything that are like make money overnight and stuff like that. I don't do that stuff, right? Like everything takes time, it takes practice, it takes repetition, but realizing that it's okay. And this is why people talk about enjoying the journey along the way, because we don't know when that expiration date is, and trying to live every moment like, hey, this could be the last moment. And I try my best to tell those people around me that it means something to me, that I care for them. And sometimes I do slack on this, sometimes I don't. But it's, again, one of those things you have to be mindful about and correct yourself when it is. It's not saying you have to go every day, hey, I appreciate you, hey, I appreciate you. No, but I'm saying maybe once a month, maybe once every couple of months, just letting that person know how much they mean to you. Thank you for giving me your time. I appreciate your time. Time, again, is one of the most important things. It's the greatest gift you have. And everybody is essentially fighting for your time, whether that's for work, whether that's for relationships, right? Or you want the attention, right? It's one of the most critical parts of our lives, is someone giving their time to us, right? Our true currency is time. We pay for time. Everything revolves around time. So remember, where are you spending your time? What relationships in your life? Are those the relationships you want in your life? Is that the job that you want in your life? Are those the things that you want in your life? Do you want to be spending your life working, selling your time? Really, there's no price you could put on time. There is none. But yet we tend to fall for it and accept money because it's something that we need to put a roof and food in our mouth. So we have to understand that. We have to understand that time, again, is the greatest gift. So cherish it, know where it's going, and make the best time of your life.